Hello and welcome back to another Underworld video. This video is going to be about all the vampire covens in the Underworld series. Covens are a gathering or community of vampires. A coven is a group of vampires who gather together for ceremonies, rituals, and or celebrations. The number of members of a coven may vary. A coven can simply be vampires that live together and try to do so in relative peace. Some covens are friendlier than others and are like family to one another. Most covens have members that tend to keep to themselves and really just view the coven as a place to live. Other members focus more on their lives as warriors, training to become hunters and killers, specifically of Lycan. These are known as death dealers. All covens have their own rules and laws to abide by, since covens are called sectors in the Blood Wars comic, implying that covens are divided into different sectors based on the 4 cardinal points in their home countries. As in any group or society, the Vampire Coven also has its own hierarchy, which helps define and shape the vampire society as a civilized community. Differing themselves from the Lycans and their primitive packs, any vampire can potentially rise through the ranks if they achieve enough respect and deeds within the vampire society. There are several ranks within certain positions in a coven. The Vampire Elders, also known as Grand Elders and Great Elders, hold the highest power in any coven, and all vampires must answer to them. The only exception being maybe another elder. They are viewed as kings/queens of the vampire society. They are the ones that ultimately choose and decide how the vampire community must act and behave. They are also the ones who elect their trusted advisors and regents. They can also sentence members to death in the case of treason, as Victor sentenced Sonya to death for having an affair with a Lycan. They all have the power to create and found new covens. In the Underworld Blood Wars comic, Selene states that they shall forge new alliances, reclaim their covens, and create new strongholds. The chain was created to avoid clashes of decisions among the 3 Grand Elders, with only one of the elders ruling at a time. The chain is also meant to overthrow Marcus from his status of first and more powerful vampire and keep him from trying to free his brother, William. Even in their absence, their will is respected and carried out. The children and direct descendants of the Grand Elders are raised to eventually become elders themselves due to their royal heritage, such as Sonya and David. Regents and coven leaders. The regents are the ones chosen by the elders to represent them in the covens and be in charge of all their affairs and estate during their absence in the covens. The coven leaders rule their covens in place of a regent, the elders, and the council. They also belong to the nobility of the vampire society, but seem to be less mobile than the council, as they usually stay in their houses. All vampires that rank below them obey and serve them without question, and their orders are only overruled by the elders. If a regent dies, another is chosen to succeed him, either by an elder or the council, and if neither is present or unable to do it, the coven itself can choose one to lead them due to popular vote. Regents can be chosen by the elders for their past achievements as warriors and or their leadership skills, as they already have a natural respect among the members of their respective covens. Some are also friends or related to the elders themselves. An example of this would be Craven, who was the former regent of the Old World Coven. They also have the heads of house. The heads of house presumably are the ones responsible for the well-being of the coven stronghold and its members, making sure everyone is doing their job. They rule the coven stronghold when there is no elders, regents, coven leaders, or council members present. Not much is known about the full extent of their duties and responsibilities. A head of house can also be a council member, in which they have more power than the other council members as long as they are in the coven ruled by said head of house. Samira herself was a head of house and a council member, and when she attempted to overthrow the council, all the present vampires followed her without question, as she had more influence within the coven than the rest of the council. Only when David was acknowledged as the heir of the elder, he gained more influence and was able to overrule her orders to kill the council. Samira is the only known head of house. There's also high-ranking members. The high-ranking members are the ones that are considered the upper class of the covens. Some are closely related to the higher ranks as descendants, siblings, or spouses of them. Others are fairly older vampires with several centuries of servitude to their covens and or have achieved a great level of respect and influence among their kind. Certain members of this class have more diplomatic tasks or errands, like the dignitaries and envoys, who travel to other covens and arrive prior to the elders and the council members to make sure everything is to their liking and prepares the coven for their arrival. All of them are wealthy, having direct ties with companies like Ziodex Industries, which supplies more income to their covens. There is also the socialites who prefer to spend a significant amount of time attending various fashionable social gatherings. Highborns, children, and descendants of the elders are also considered high-ranking members. There's also vampire aristocrats. The aristocrats are the ones deemed to convey an approximate rank intermediate between the highest and lowest titles of the coven's hierarchy. They can also be related to higher ranks, but don't contribute as much to the covens as the high-ranking members do. They are usually vampires that were once nobles like ladies, lords, counts, countesses, and any other rank of nobility when they were humans. When they join a coven, they maintain their noble status, as they likely chose to become immortals, which allows them to live in power and wealth for eternity. And of course, we can't forget about the Death Dealers. The Death Dealers are the military forces of the Vampire Society and the closest to a law enforcement group within a coven. Any lower or higher ranking vampire can become a Death Dealer if they so desire to become one. The Death Dealers are the warriors trained specifically to become the hunters of lichens, but they can also be tasked to defend a coven during an attack. Some of them can be chosen by a regent or elder to be their personal bodyguards and to deal with their individual matters outside the coven's stronghold, similar to an elite guard. The Death Dealers seem to have more privileges than the lower ranked vampires, as they are able to leave the houses as they please and spend several days outside it. They must also have their own military ranks, as they have at least one vampire that leads their troops and gives them orders during combat, as well also have recruits that are considered lower rank, which are still in the training process to become Death Dealers. And then lastly on the list we have just ordinary vampires. These are the lowest ranks of vampires, and the most common members of the covens. The vampires that become part of the coven begin at this rank. Having fewer privileges than any other superior ranks, these vampires have more mundane jobs, usually serving as maids, servants, attendants, drivers, ladies-in-waiting, and doormen, being tasked with domestic work. Some also serve as doctors, blacksmiths, and engineers, helping to improve the coven's stability. Attendants serve the high-ranking members of the coven, and the ladies-in-waiting attend to the vampire elder, Amelia, and presumably the female council members. Among these are also the coven historians, like Andreas Tanis, which are the ones responsible for recording vampire history and the history of the coven, and are one of the few lower ranks that have access to the elders and the council. It's interesting to note that vampires don't rise to a social status until they reach at least a full mortal lifespan and age, or they can shortcut to the upper echelons of vampire society if they have gained a reputation as a war hero or if they become romantically involved with higher ranks. Despite their lower ranks, they still live in relative luxury, usually being present at parties and ceremonies. They don't seem to leave their houses and prefer the safety of its walls. Most are socially engaged and seem to know every gossip within their covens. When an ordinary pure-born vampire is born, they are usually viewed with more respect and are already considered of a higher rank despite their younger age compared to some of the ordinary vampires. Ordinary vampires are also known as lowborns. The Old World Coven is the oldest coven of vampires that is located in Europe. The coven likely had a different title before 1873, when the cities of Buda, Pest, and Abuda were united to form the city of Budapest. The Old World Coven was formed in the 6th century, as the vampires began to take action against the powerful enemy, the werewolves. When Hungarian warlord Victor agreed to wage war on the werewolves on behalf of Marcus Corvinus in return for immortality that turned his army into the first Death Dealers, the foundation for a society was laid. Under the leadership of the 3 vampire elders, this society grew and rules were established. Thus the Covenant and the Coven with it were conceived. Victor and Amelia, 2 of the 3 vampire elders, sought to undermine Marcus's authority, which implies this may have been the primary reason a vampire council was formed and the chain was conceived. In the 3rd film, taking place in medieval times, a large number of Coven members are seen in a secluded mountain fortress of Castle Corvinus. However, it is unlikely that this was the vampires' only settlement at the time, as Samaria is known to have been a region of the Budapest Coven for an unspecified period of time prior to being sent to the Nordic Coven in 1402 or 1403. At some unknown point, the growing vampire coven would also spread out to branches over the continent, establishing power bases and extending its reach to countries like the Paris Coven in France and the Nordic Coven in Scandinavia. Later, the vampires colonized America and established the New World Coven, most likely with a base in New York. By the 21st century, as seen in the first film, a number of members had gathered at a secluded mansion, but it remains unknown how large a part of the Coven's population they represented. The vampires in the Coven owned Ziodex Industries, which had begun manufacturing synthetic blood. This medical company is one of the reasons that the Covens can afford such lavish places to live. The infrastructure of the Coven is largely unknown. There is an occasional mention of houses, but it remains unclear if a house is synonymous with a coven or if a coven can consist of several houses, much like a royal court. What is clear is that the elders sit at the heart of the coven, their commands either enforced or tempered by the council, while the death dealers stand guard and wait to do their bidding. The regent enjoys considerable status, but the extent of his political power remains unclear. Since more than one coven exists, it is possible that the position of regents was conceived to rule the covens while in turn being ruled by the Vampire Council. Also, at least by modern times, there are dignitaries that may act as envoys when diplomacy is called for. One such position seen an envoy of the elder Amelia, who is most likely entrusted to a member of the elite. As the current regent Craven keeps a large personal bodyguard consisting of Soren and his men in the form of an entourage of retainers, it is possible that the elite keep retainers for various purposes as sign of status. The Old World Coven was destroyed when Marcus is awakened and burns it to the ground, killing most if not all of the vampires within before setting the blaze. It is unknown who gained control of the Ziodex Industries after this. It could have been one of the other covens such as the Eastern Coven. Some of the notable members of the Old World Coven include Sonia, Victor, Andreas Tanis, Erica, Soren, Craven, and Celine. The Eastern Coven, also known as the Corvinus Coven and the Eastern Sector, is a coven of vampires led by Cassius, Samira, and the other members of the Vampire Council. Their seat of power is a castle, possibly located in Prague. As the son of the vampire elder Amelia, David is the pure-blooded heir to the Eastern Coven. The Eastern Coven was founded in the 6th century by the vampire elder Amelia. At some point, Samira joined the Eastern Coven, having disliked the Nordic Coven's way of life and having been previously sent away from the Old World Coven by her sire, the vampire elder Victor. Whether the rest of the elite council had been part of the coven since it was founded, or whether they came to the Eastern Coven from other covens at a later date is unknown. During roughly the last decade of Amelia's final rule, she left the coven, despite supposedly being with the New World Coven at this point in time, and traveled to the Nordic Coven with her mate Thomas to give birth to their son David. But Victor, or possibly Craven on Victor's behalf, grew suspicious of her whereabouts, so he sent Samira to investigate. However, by the time Samira and her troops arrived, Amelia had left the Nordic Coven and returned to the Eastern Coven, Thomas having already returned to his own coven, taking David with him. Years later, the Eastern Coven is one of the only two known covens to have survived the purges alongside the Nordic Coven, making it the epicenter of the vampire world. Once David proves himself to be Amelia's heir, and thus the rightful ruler of the coven, the death dealers in the council side with him against Samira. Shortly afterwards, the Lycans launch a massive attack on the coven, which they nearly win before Celine arrives with the Nordic Coven to help in battle. Samira is killed by David, while Celine's enhanced powers enable her to kill Marius. Once Marius is dead, the Lycans end their attack on the Eastern Coven and retreat. Following the battle, Celine, David, and Lena are chosen as the new vampire elders by the Eastern Coven and its council. The castle of the Eastern Coven contains a foyer, a training room, armory, dungeons, and living quarters. All of the rooms are decorated in a Gothic fashion, except the training room and the armory, which are very modern, with much of the decor being black and therefore contrasting with the white stone that the castle is built from. Most of the floors appear to be a highly polished stone, possibly marble, which have been arranged by color to create large sweeping patterns. The castle goes into lockdown in the daytime, with gates barring the entrance to the castle grounds, all located at strategic points and normally manned by security guards. Metal shutters are automatically lowered, completely covering the doors and windows to keep the sun out. Some windows, and likely some doors, do have buttons located nearby that act as manual overrides and allow a vampire to lower, raise, or to prevent the shutters from being lowered or raised on that particular window. The castle has surveillance cameras located at strategic spots to ensure the protection and safety of the coven. Amelia installed a series of secret passageways throughout the castle that leads to the private chambers, including Samira's. However, very few know of these passages, Not even the head of house at the time of the Lycan assault, Samira, seemed to be aware of them. The only person shown to know of them is Amelia's former lover, Thomas, and their son, David. The doors that lead to the private chambers have a peephole to see into the private chambers. That's a little weird. And now we're on to the Nordic Coven. The Nordic Coven, also known as Vardor, is a coven of vampires led by Vidar. Their seat of power is in a castle located in the northern peak of Scandinavia. Amelia founded the Nordic Coven and helped them in times of need. Samira was once sent to the Nordic Coven. However, despite her time with the Coven, Samira disagreed with their more peaceful ways. After Amelia died, the mourning ceremony they had for her lasted a month. The Nordic Coven is way more independent than any of the other covens, as they did not answer to the council and lived as they wished, away from the politics and the wars among their species. It would seem that many are unaware of this coven's existence, with some believing that the Nordic Coven is only a legend. Many Nordic vampires in the Coven have participated in a sacred ritual, which also enhances their powers. Samira declined or wasn't worthy to undergo the ritual during her time at the Coven. The specific location of the Coven is not stated in the film. However, given its name, it is most likely situated on one of the Nordic countries. David and Celine traveled to the Coven from the Eastern Coven by train, and the Coven's castle is seen to be in a mountainous region and near a lake. This terrain is consistent with much of Norway and western Sweden and the Scandinavian mountains. The Nordic Coven is located at the top of a frozen cliff, which can be used as a natural defense against outside threats. Inside of its walls, there are several domestic and working areas. Some of these places are the courtyard, the armory, and the undercroft. The Nordic Coven is far removed from the contemporary vampire society and seems to lack any modern technology, relying mostly on its medieval architecture and their monastic ways. At the entrance, there is a great bell which is used to sound an alarm when the Coven is under attack. Passing through it is the main stairway that leads further down into the castle. Inside of it, there are no windows and has several fireplaces to keep the temperature agreeable. The ice and the torches seem to be some of the few decorations within the castle, along with several artifacts like metal plaques, wall runes, and lichen skulls. Thomas's sword is also on display. Passing through the main gatehouse, there is a courtyard, the only outdoor place within the castle walls. The courtyard has stairs and balconies on either side. This area is constantly covered in snow given the region's cold weather. The courtyard is the first line of defense when under attack. It also has ramparts and a fortified outpost situated over the gate, which is used by archers for flanking positions. The gathering room is where Nordic vampires gather to talk, lecture, and discuss important events. Like the rest of the castle, the walls, floors, and ceiling are made of stone. Many tables around the fireplaces can be seen here. The gathering room also has a stone archway and is located near where the display stand of Thomas's sword and Amelia's blood memories were kept. These were the blood memories ingested by the Vampire Council to prove that David was actually the true heir of Amelia's to be the Vampire Elder. The last part of the Nordic Coven I want to talk about is the Undercroft. The Undercroft is a crypt underneath the castle halls, similar to a temple where the Nordic vampires go to meditate and perform their sacred rituals. There are several pools and fountains in this area. The vampires use the water to cocoon those that choose to perform the ritual and leave their bodies resting until their awakening. The pools are used as a meditation place, in which the vampires don't need to go through the cocooning process again. They simply enter and leave the water as they please. Known members of the Nordic Coven include Amelia, Vidar, Lena, Thomas, David, Samira, and Celine. The New World Coven. The New World Coven is a coven of vampires located in America. It is implied that this coven was or still is linked to the Old World Coven, but it remains unknown if this younger coven was originally established by descendants of the Old World Coven or with the elders' consent, like a colony. And if so, if they ever declared some form of independence. While what role the Elder played in the younger coven's history and present remains unknown, by the time of the first film, Amelia, the council, neatly groomed attendants, ladies-in-waiting, and her bodyguards were returning from New York, most likely a seat of power for the New World Coven. In the first novelization, visiting dignitaries and high-ranking members were also returning from the New World Coven as well. It is clear that the New World Coven at the time held the elders in high regard, and that some form of reunion was set to commence with Marcus's awakening in the 21st century. It remains unknown whether or not the New World Coven survived the purges, as the Coven was never mentioned again after the first film. The infrastructure of the New World Coven is unknown. Although it was proven that the New World Coven has death dealers were shown accompanying and protecting Amelia and the Council in the first film. There is occasionally mention of houses, but it remains unknown if a house is synonymous with the Coven, and or if a Coven can even consist of several houses, much like a royal court. It is possible that the New World Coven had or still has a government equivalent to the Old World Coven's council. It is also possible that the council governed the New World Coven as well, since they lived in the New World Coven at the time. And the last thing I wanted to briefly mention in this video was the Coven that's led by Thomas. The Coven is located in an old, run-down cave-like area underground that is used as a hideout for the vampires after the purges. Thomas's Coven is located underground outside the city just below a hydroelectric dam. Given its considerable size and architecture, it must have been constructed prior to the purges. The reason for why it was built and who built it, however, is unclear. It could possibly have been a warehouse used for vampires' general storage, or perhaps an ancient abandoned vampire safe house, or simply made as a safety measure in the event of an attack or an incident with their previous location. The entrance is poorly hidden by a few sacks and a wooden trapdoor. Beneath there is an ancient-looking paved manhole which leads further underground. This manhole has a runic design and requires a round keystone to open, as well as a combination lock. It's unknown if the lock can be closed from the inside or how many keystones existed to open this. Inside the place seems to be in a precarious state, with a lot of dust, humidity, and several gutters and watering holes. Some walls seem to be cracking and others have moss growing in it. They seem to use very little electricity, which is likely provided by the dam. The Coven stood in stark contrast to the decadent covens of old. It was bare, run down, and lacking any amenities. The decoration is very likely brought from their old homes, such as drapes, blankets, cutlery, and books. Some items from the Old World Coven were spread throughout Thomas's Coven, including Soren's silver whips, Victor's jacket, and a death dealer uniform which reminded the Coven members of their proud past. The living quarters are smaller rooms with small beds that could double as couches. The rooms are lit by candelabras and have rugs on the floor as well as owner's decorations. There was also freezing cavities on the rock walls where they could store some blood sacs. However, it is unknown if it was a natural cooling or if it required electricity to function. The Coven possesses many corridors and entrances. There are many objects scattered throughout them, such as weapons, armor, relics, and chests. Known members of this Coven are Thomas, the Coven leader, David, who is formerly a member, and Olivia, who was the doctor who helped save Eve. Well, that's it for this video. That's all the Covens of the Underworld series. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, subscribe. I really appreciate it. And if there's any topics you'd like me to cover about the Underworld series, please leave a comment down below. Anyway, again, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time.